Welcome to Free Thought Matters. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. Annie Laurie and I are the executive directors of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We are a national organization with more than 31,000 non-religious members in North America, working to keep state and church separate.
And to educate the public about non-theism. We'd be glad to send you a free copy of our newspaper, Free Thought Today, and a brochure about our 41 years of activism, so that you can help us in our work so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail by becoming a member of FFRF at ffrf.org.
¿Se puede saber si Dios existe? That's the title of a book written by our guest today, Hector Avalos. Se puede saber si Dios existe means, can one know if God exists?
Yes. And my answer is no, we cannot.
Huh.
and then I give the reasons why we cannot. And that means I address a lot of the classical arguments for the existence of God and try to tell you why those are not very good arguments. So the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, the moral argument, etc.
All in Spanish, huh?
All in Spanish.
So Hector Avalos is a professor of religious studies in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Iowa State University. He has a Ph.D. from Harvard, and he's authored more than 10 books. I think I've read all of them, maybe not all of them,
Yeah.
but including the book Fighting Words, The Origins of Religious Violence, The End of Biblical Studies, and The Bad Jesus, The Ethics of New Testament Ethics. So we're glad to have you on Free Thought Matters.
Yeah, thank you.
So you and I met some years ago. It turns out we had a little bit in common. You
Yes.
were born in Nogales, Mexico.
Yes.
And I used to preach in Nogales, Mexico, so it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Because I'm about 6, 7, 9 years older than
Yeah.
you. It's not impossible that you were one of those little kids who came up to hear.
Not impossible.
Well, who knows? But and then you were a child preacher yourself.
Yes, I was. And so I preached in Nogales, and I preached in towns all over Arizona, Phoenix area particularly. So, yeah, we were in the same business.
Yeah, you were a believer. You were in the
Yes.
pulpit just as
Yes.
preaching the gospel.
So I'm assuming evangelical Protestant version of Christianity?
Yes, Pentecostal evangelical Protestant.
Did you speak in tongues?
Yes. I only did it once that I can recall, But when I did it, I thought, well, this is interesting, I can now explain that, though, as a phenomenon due to a number of factors that I think are the key to understanding glossolalia, or speaking in tongues.
So how old were you when you first started preaching, and how did you get into the preaching business? Was this something that your family kind of pushed you into?
Probably I was about 7 or 8
Wow.
in there. And I did that until about the first year of college, or maybe, the senior year of high school.
And how did you start doing that? What inspired you?
What inspired me were watching other people who did that. And I thought, oh, I can do that. And not only can I do that, I think I can do it better. And so I did, not necessarily better, but I did preach all over the place. There were many preachers who were much better rhetorically. And
So there was a radical change made at some point.
Yep.
And when did that start to happen?
in high school.
In high school?
In high school, yeah. So in high school, I met up with a Jehovah's Witness who came to my house and told me my Bible was mistranslated. I believed in the Trinity. He did not. And when he asked me, well, why do you believe in the Trinity? I said, well, because of John 1:1 for one of many verses. And, of course, John 1:1 says in most Bibles, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he said, well, no, it doesn't say that. It says, and the Word was a God. And so I said, wow, it's the first time I learned of any kind of radical differences between versions.
So that's very interesting that someone seeking to convert you to
Yes.
another form of Christianity would start your doubts that would lead
Yes.
you to become a well-known atheist.
Yes.
And also one of the few atheists who is a very distinguished Bible scholar.
Yeah, that's right. I think I've written still the only book in Spanish by an atheist born in Latin America. So
Really?
I'm not sure there's another one. I don't know of another
I think
one.
there are now. You were the first.
Yeah.
But there's a Peruvian author, two
yeah.
Peruvian authors now who are writing about Catholicism. But
Yeah. But are they biblical scholars? That's my question.
oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
You wrote this for your mother, isn't that what?
That's right. I was inspired by my mother's questions, and I said, well, I have to tell her why I believe this. And it started off as a letter kind of thing, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like, this is a book, and that's how that started.
And how did your mother take that book?
She read the book. She read the whole book. She read it in front of me, at least parts of it, and she said, "Oh yeah, I understand," But of course, she didn't understand.
But your family didn't disown you when you became an
No, my
atheist?
family did not disown me. The reason I mostly live with my grandmother. I was raised by my grandmother, who was a live-in housekeeper pretty much all of her life until she retired. And so that's why when I saw my mother, it was like in the summers, or I lived with my mother for a couple years too. So it's a more complicated story, but yeah.
But so Hector, you started getting your doubts in high school, and then how did you even get into a college? I imagine that was a big struggle.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's right. Not a lot of people in my church went to college or were going to college at that time. But I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be I first wanted to be a scientist because I saw the Apollo missions in the late '60s, and I said, "Oh, maybe that's what I want to do." And
You felt the same way, didn't you?
Yeah, I think we all did back then.
and so I actually went to college in the 7th grade. So and so in the 7th grade I went up to the college.
So you were smart.
I went up and I said, "Would you let me into your college?" And he goes, "Well, no, you're in the 7th grade." And I said, "Well, I got good grades. I read a lot of textbooks, college level, and so I wonder if you'd give me a chance." So the guy said, "Well, if you come back with a letter from your principal, I might." 2 weeks later, I came back with a letter from my principal. I said, "Yeah, he can do it. If anyone can do it, he can do it." So I said, "You said you let me in." And so he let me in. And he says, "But you can't start with physics or chemistry. You have to start with algebra." So he put me in an algebra class. And on the first day of class, he put up an equation on the board, and he said, "Who can solve this equation?" And I said, "Well, I think I can," and so I did. But unfortunately, it was the last time I solved anything in that class. I was a horrible mathematician. I was never going to be a physicist, never going to be a chemist. So I dropped out of college in the 7th grade.
But you got back there eventually at the right age.
To the very same college, actually.
And you told me that it was your interest in the biblical languages that got you interested in. You have a degree in Near Eastern languages from Harvard, is that right?
Right, that's right.
Wow.
However,
A doctorate.
Yeah. So, however, my initial plan was to be a biblical archaeologist. And as a biblical archaeologist, you have to know the languages, you have to know the text, etc. And so that's how I got started. But I got very ill, at the beginning of my sophomore year, and I had gone from the college where I began my career, and dropped out and went back, finished, but this time I could not finish even my sophomore year. And so I had to drop out, and I had to explain. Actually, nobody could explain what was wrong with me. And what was wrong with me was something called Wagner's granulomatosis. Today it has a different name, but back then it was Wagner's granulomatosis.
So, despite this chronic illness, you have gone on to write, 10 books?
Yep.
And I think that what is most amazing is you started off as a child preacher, and now you're an atheist who is a Bible scholar.
Yeah.
And just briefly, what kind of contribution as an atheist do you make to biblical scholarship, and how are you accepted by the other Bible scholars?
Yeah. So I should add that I've written 10 books solely authored, and I mean 8 books solely authored, and 2 are co-edited. There's a book that I have just finished in terms of I'm revised it, and so I don't know whether to count it as my 11th or my 10th or
That's Fighting Words. That one's being...
Yeah, that one.
I thought that was fascinating. Your hypothesis that salvation is a scarce resource, and that's why there's so much religious bloodshed in the world.
Yeah. So I focused on four scarce resources. Salvation was one of them.
Yeah.
Holy space, sacred space. Group privileging, and so forth. But I think what the first version of it did not do well was to say, I am arguing against William Cavanaugh, who did inspire the first book. And so there was actually 2 books in one there, One was, here's a new theory for why you have religious violence. And the second was, William Cavanaugh's theory is not a good one.
I don't know who William Cavanaugh is.
So William Cavanaugh wrote a book called The Myth of Religious Violence in 2009. However, he had been writing about religious violence since at least the time I wrote the first one. And basically he says religious violence is a myth.
Religious what?
Violence.
Oh, religious violence is a myth?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he says there is no such thing as religious violence because there's no such thing as religion. Or if there is such a thing as religion, then it's something that doesn't have any viability any more than anything else. So he doesn't believe that there is such a thing as religious violence. So he called it the myth of religious violence.
So we have to take a break, Hector, and we'll continue talking about the reprint or the new book that's coming out. And I want to ask you about the reaction of your students when they take your class. We're talking with Dr. Hector Avalos, author of many books, a professor of religious studies at Iowa State University. Stay tuned for more Free Thought Matters.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I never really had a single defining moment of coming out as an atheist, as they say. I considered myself non-religious, although I suppose there was always that feeling somewhere that God could be real, because billions of people thought it was true. Why would I know more than billions of people around the earth? I never specifically told my parents that I was non-religious, but I never really hid it from them either. By the time I was in high school, I was pretty much past believing in God or devils and ghosts, fairies, whatever. The topic never really came up much in my life because I didn't hang around with overly religious people, so I never discussed religion at any length or depth. But once I got to college, I decided to take an Intro to Philosophy course because I saw in the syllabus that there would be discussions on the various so-called proofs of God's existence. Well, that piqued my interest. So I was definitely curious to see what these proofs were, since I figured a proof, by definition, is a logical, well-reasoned, and airtight case. So I thought, well, maybe I was too hasty in my disbelief. So we learned about the ontological argument, the first cause argument, the cosmological argument, the design argument. After learning these and others, I distinctly remember being disappointed. Not because I learned that basically God isn't real, but because these proofs were easily disproved. Here I was, some 18-year-old college freshman, picking apart these proofs made by some of the history's most renowned philosophers. I realized that if those were the best arguments for God, then there really is no reason to believe, and that my assumptions had almost assuredly been correct all along. That's why I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist.
And welcome back to Free Thought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with Professor Hector Avalos, and a longtime friend, professor of religious studies and the Bible, Harvard degrees, author of many books. So you've been teaching at Iowa State for what, 26?
Since 93.
Since 93, okay.
Yeah,
You said you weren't that great at math, right? Let's see, 26 years. So you must have a lot of religious students who take a class from a professor who's teaching the Bible as a known atheist. What happens? What do the students say about that?
Oh, well, at first I thought, well, that's going to be a problem, you know, because I had a problem in North Carolina where I first taught a course.
In Chapel Hill?
Yeah, on the Bible. Bart Ehrman was over there at the time. And so I said, well, it was such a bad experience, you know, that I said I have to do it differently. And the way I thought, if I do it this way, there should be no controversy at all. And I did what's called the multiple viewpoint approach, where I explain what multiple viewpoints believe about the Bible. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the traditional Jews say this, Christians say this, secular scholars say this, but I never say who is right. And that's the difference.
But they know you're an atheist, don't they?
They know, but I always say, but I could have changed overnight. You know, and so if you want to know what I am, you ask me on the last day of class, and I'll tell you, because I could have converted to Buddhism. I could have converted to
who knows?
Yeah.
And do you get asked by students?
Yes, I do.
And what do you tell them?
I tell them exactly what I say. You know, that I am an atheist. I tell them the conversion story. In fact, I give them a slide presentation on my conversion story.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, why, as an atheist, have you devoted your life to biblical studies?
To explain to people that biblical studies is still an ecclesial academic complex. In other words, it is run by churches, and most of the professors are believers. And then it has an academic component, so it's ecclesial and academic, and that's the reason I want to write on the subject.
You want to make it academic,
yes,
rather than ecclesiastical.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the problem is, of course, that once you remove the academic part, there's not really much left to biblical studies.
So, what are some of your views about the Bible?
Well, I definitely not a divine book. Definitely written over many, hundreds of years, and just that Bible means different things to different people. So, Jews don't recognize the 27 books of the New Testament as the Bible. And then Catholics and Protestants have a difference in the number of books they recognize. We know from historical sources that early Christians who describe themselves as Christian had different canons, different groupings of books they called the Bible or something similar.
So over the years, Hector, we've been friends since '91, I guess, and I've written some books about the Bible and things, and you are my go-to guy, especially with the Old Testament. If I have a question to ask, and you've helped me correct some errors that I would have had in a book about what does that ancient Hebrew word actually mean, and how was it used in the context and all of that. So you're kind of the scholar that the others of us need, that depth
Right.
of research in there.
Right.
You also have written a book about the New Testament, The Bad Jesus.
Yes,
What a provocative title.
The bad Jesus.
Shouldn't Jesus be, isn't Jesus like this great moral authority in the world?
No, not at all. Jesus is a moral authority only for those people that believe in Jesus. And even though there are some atheists and seculars, writers who say, no, he's also a very good man. So even if I don't believe in Christianity, I still believe that Jesus is a good man.
Thomas Jefferson
You
said
hear
that.
that a lot.
Yes.
And even
and-
Bertrand Russell sometimes kind of said that.
Yeah.
Why isn't he good?
He's not good because he advocates a lot of things that are against the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So he, for example, he's not always peaceful. He
I
said-
came not to bring peace but a sword.
That's right. You should hate your parents. You will be burned alive if you take it literally at the end of time. And then he asked his disciples to just leave what they're doing, their jobs, and follow him. Imagine, ask yourself today, who would do that?
A cult leader.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Even what's that verse about the lilies of the field? Don't have to work. They don't do anything.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of advice is really very
exactly.
bad advice.
Yeah.
Take no thought for the morrow.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I said, there's so many things here. The way he treats women, the way he...
Mother, what have I to do with thee? Woman, what have I to do with thee? To his mother.
Exactly. So I had a series of chapters based on each of those themes, love, hate, and...
It's kind of like in churches you only hear the more palatable passages.
Yes.
But if you actually sit down and read the New Testament, as many atheists do, you get a lot of real sudden doubts about Jesus.
Yes.
I mean, somebody who, as you say, believes in hell.
Yes.
Is that a good thing?
Not necessarily.
Or that if you don't believe in me, you're going to go to hell?
Exactly. So yeah, there are Christians who say there's no such thing as hell, but basically, historically, most Christians do believe in hell, or in the West. at
Now,
least.
speaking of something provocative, in your book, Fighting Words, I believe you also have a passage that compares Nazism, the precepts of Nazism, to Luther.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So Luther had a 7-point plan for the Jews. He wrote about it in 1543 on the Jews and their lies, and so he had policies that were replicated by Hitler and his regime in the 30s and 40s.
What were some of those 7?
Some of those would be, for example, killing them if they were found with their holy books. Would be also involve having them work until they couldn't work anymore, or until they
die, which is like what happened in the concentration camps. What Auschwitz work sets you free.
Yeah.
We're going to work you to death.
Yeah.
So Martin Luther was quite a reprehensible character.
He was.
And Hitler, of course, was not Lutheran. Hitler was Catholic.
Yes.
And that's something that often is suppressed.
But a lot of the German military were Lutherans who were carrying this out.
Yeah, there are surveys actually, and I quoted some of them about how the German soldiers, the Nazis, saw themselves, and most of them believed in God.
Yeah.
And then they would say, "We believe in God."
Well, the roots of anti-Semitism would be religious in nature.
Yeah,
These were people who were not Christian, or they killed Christ. That kind of myth.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes back to Jesus himself in John 8:44 and other passages.
And what's in that passage?
He called the Jews the sons of Satan, and they're liars. And so that's the basic.
Well, there you go. That's biblical authority.
Yeah. So the question has always been, is he speaking about the Jews, like the leaders of the Jews, or all the Jews, etc.?
So you have a book called The End of Biblical Studies, And we only have a minute left here, but it seems to me that you and I agree that people should read the Bible. In fact, a lot of Isaac Asimov and others have said reading the Bible is the fastest path to atheism ever conceived.
Yes, it is.
And so you're not discouraging people from opening it and reading it. You want them to actually read it with what kind of an attitude?
Well, with a critical attitude, with a mind that says we're not buying everything that we're reading, that sort of thing. But in general, I mean, my whole system, my whole purpose has been to make the Bible only one of many ancient books that existed and you should study and read.
So to get back to the end of biblical studies, what are you saying there?
I'm saying that it's one of those phrases that has two meanings. The end of biblical studies in terms of the purpose of biblical studies, and the end of biblical studies in terms of termination. So a lot of people think I'm only speaking of the second, not the first, and et cetera. But I'm saying that, eventually the Bible has to be left behind.
That we need to move forward in society and not be dragged down by these ancient teachings, myths, and so on. Well, you've done a lot to educate the public so that we can move forward, Hector. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Free Thought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.